Good evening and welcome, dear friends, to this fifth session of the 2022 Turner Winter Series, now in its 17th year and now being held in the spacious comfort of the Robert H. Jackson Center here in Jamestown. I'm Maureen Raveno. Whether you are here in person, watching through live streaming, or if you are joining us later via YouTube, it is my great pleasure to begin our time together with a brief introduction of our wonderful guest, Leigh-Anne Hendrick, who will engage in conversation with our perennial host and the founder of this series, Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. So let me first say a few words to begin to get to know and appreciate our special guest. Leigh-Anne Hendrick is a high school social studies teacher with 24 years of classroom experience. She has taught Global Studies 9 and 10, an honors level full credit Holocaust and Genocide elective, and an elective on contemporary world issues titled #R2K, that is, Responsibility to Know. Mrs. Hendrick has worked as a consultant with the United States Department of Education's Teacher-to-Teacher training program and has presented both nationally and internationally. She received training at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., and in 2005 was named one of 15 Museum Teacher Fellows in the United States. She has also been awarded the Toby Tickton Back Award for Holocaust Education. Recently, Mrs. Hendrick has been working to expand Holocaust and human rights education in Chautauqua County and now serves as the program director for the Theodore and Pauline Cohen Holocaust Education Program in conjunction with the Hebrew Congregation of Chautauqua. She is also founding director of the Chautauqua County Summer Institute for Human Rights and Genocide Studies. In both programs, she has been instrumental in developing teacher and student training programs to broaden and deepen understanding of the Holocaust, genocide, human rights, and social justice. She strives to empower students and educators to take an active role in our shared humanity. To this end, in 2016, Mrs. Hendrick had the honor of traveling to Rwanda with humanitarian Carl Wilkins, an experience she can only describe as transformative. This experience continues to impact the lens through which she teaches and by which she lives. I am personally grateful to have traveled with her on this year's Chautauqua Institution Hebrew Congregation-sponsored student Holocaust education trip. And so, it is with great appreciation with Greg that I now welcome Leigh-Anne Hendrick to this evening's conversation.
Thanks, Maureen. Tell me, Leigh-Anne, what kind of traveler is Maureen Raveno?
Maureen is an amazing traveler. Maureen kept up with our group. We did a lot of walking. We did a lot of walking tours throughout DC, and Maureen was awesome. She jumped right in with the kids in our Get to Know You activities at our pizza dinner, and Maureen was awesome.
So Maureen joined you, and I think she's been with you probably in the past. Why would Maureen or anybody want to join you on this trip to Washington?
Well, this was Maureen's first trip with us. I'm hoping not her last. But the trip really just gives students and teachers the opportunity to dig a little bit deeper into history by exploring the Holocaust Museum. That's our focal point, but we also expanded our trip this year to include more social justice and human rights. To that end, we went to the new African American Museum, and we followed that with a Black Lives Matter tour ending in Black Lives Matter Plaza outside of the White House. And it's just a way for students to really live the history that they see in their books. You know, when they're learning about the Holocaust or human rights and they see artifacts in their books, how different it is when they see them in person. We also like to take the time to get to know different people. In the past, we've visited with various Holocaust survivors. That wasn't able to happen on this trip due to COVID restrictions. But that's just such a meaningful interaction for our students. We've visited with Rabbi Berkowitz a few times, and just his love of life and his zest of life gives students hope that even after great trauma, there can still be beauty.
Who's Rabbi Berkowitz?
Oh, Rabbi Berkowitz is a Holocaust survivor. He passed away a few years ago, and he lived in Falls Church, and he survived Auschwitz. And he tells stories not just about the tragedy of his experience during the Holocaust, but also of the lighter times and how even in the camp he was able to make friends, and those friends are what helped him to survive. He will say that he got through the generosity of strangers, and that's one of the messages that was given to us, to be the stranger in someone's life.
Did this come naturally to Leigh-Anne Hendrick, this idea of the studies of genocide and Holocaust?
I would say I always had a passion for human rights and wanting to do something for people when they are wronged. If you talk to my mother, she will tell you I was in high school during Tiananmen Square, and I came home and told her I was going to go to China and help. So there's always been something in me that's been passionate about helping others and lifting others up. However, my start of my study of the Holocaust and wanting to dig deeper into the Holocaust actually came from here at the Jackson Center. I was at a workshop here, maybe 2003, with a woman named Christina Chavarria, who worked for the Holocaust Museum of Houston. And, you know, I walked in as a third or fourth year teacher thinking, oh, I know a lot about this history. And, you know, I spent time with her and I was like, whoa, I didn't know a whole lot, and what I knew wasn't actually correct. And it made me want to dig deeper into the history to learn more. And the packet of information she provided teachers with, the last page, was about continued programming, continued opportunities for teachers at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And so I followed up with that, and that really started me down this path.
2003, I remember that. I remember the Paul Benson.
Sure.
And was very active in obtaining the funding through this Jamestown, and Walters, forget his first name, but shame on me, were instrumental in getting a significant sum, and then bringing in that Houston group who had a tool chest, essentially, toolkit. Mm-hmm. And as I recall that, and I assume that's what you picked up, and that you're the legacy of that.
Yes, picked it up and ran with it, and now we're sharing similar toolkits with teachers in Chautauqua County. We do workshops. We did one in December that was absolutely fabulous. We connected with the Defiant Requiem Foundation out of Washington, D.C., as well as with the Anne Frank Project out of Buffalo State, to give teachers tools that they can implement in their classrooms to teach not only the Holocaust, but human rights and social justice, and the tools to sit with people and learn their stories. You're very good at that. And so that they can get to know people and share their stories.
Well, we want to know about your story. You went to high school where?
I went to high school at Lewiston Porter, which is outside of Niagara Falls, New York.
Mm-hmm. So what drew you to this area?
So my husband worked for the state police, and he could transfer to an area of the state, and we chose this area, and then we just stayed once we got here.
And then you found position at Chautauqua?
Yes.
Now, when you come here, you drink the Kool-Aid, and you think this is something where I'd like to explore, but you still got to convince somebody in the Board of Education that this is a real, something unique. How did that go?
It's great to have allies who believe in similar things that you do, and I've been very fortunate to have a principal who believed in what I was doing and supported me along that path, and really saw the good that came out of it. Saw, you know, when they talked to students and they heard students tell the stories of how this study has impacted their life in meaningful ways, they wanted to support it.
So then you have to create a curriculum. Did you do that right away, or did it take a few years to kind of kick it in?
It took a few years to create the curriculum, but yes, I created the curriculum from scratch, and it changes from year to year depending on new things and new histories. But yeah, I created that from scratch. This year, I made the move to middle school, so I'm not teaching my Holocaust elective. But the beautiful thing is I was able to pass it off to a brand new teacher, and to watch a new teacher take that and run with it has been amazing as well. I do hope to jump back into that position next year, though.
So this is like 2005, 6, you now are starting the classes. Says you've been doing it for almost 25 years, classes. Did Drew Biter and Joe Carb, drop a few names here, were they part of your world? Because they did that similar thing in Springville and certainly came here as well.
Sure, so very early on, I had already had my Holocaust elective, and I was presenting at workshops around the state, which is where I kind of connected with Drew Biter and the Buffalo crew. And there was this idea to put together their summer institute in Buffalo, and we put together a sister program down here. And so those early years of the summer institute, we were running very similar programs the same weeks. Theirs was in Buffalo, ours was here. We would share some speakers and go back and forth. And then the one time they brought their whole crew down, and we filled this space.
Was that the time, there was one of those summer institutes where actually we had C-SPAN here.
Yes.
Was that part of that?
Yes.
That was amazing. We had Gabriel Bach, and who was the prosecutor of Adolf Eichmann, Eli Rosenbaum from the Department of Justice.
Yes.
Doug Necker spoke about Farb, and I spoke, and remember there was a fifth one. It was quite a panel. I mean, and it got C-SPAN attention.
Yes.
Given that, was it important for the students, because we, on our side, the Jackson Center side, never quite sure whether, as we're presenting people with personalities who have a story, whether that's connecting, in a sense, they're meeting people, touching the hem of folks who really live some amazing stories. From your side, the students, how do they react to such a thing?
How did the students react to the history?
Yeah.
So in many different ways, and the Holocaust class is way more than a history class. We do a lot of connecting with survivors, connecting with stories. We read a book that really has become a turning point in my class called Sunflower by Simon Wiesenthal, and it's on the possibilities and limits of forgiveness. And for students, they read Simon's story. And the gist of Simon's story is he is in a concentration camp. He is taken to the bedside of a dying Nazi soldier. And the dying Nazi soldier wants forgiveness for the crimes that he committed. And Simon Wiesenthal walks away, and he doesn't give him an answer. But the story stays with Simon Wiesenthal. And so he wrote it into this book. And the last question of the book is, if you had been in my shoes, what would you have done? So the second half of the book is a symposium of just some amazing people asking that question, answering that question. So you have like Nelson Mandela, and you have people from Cambodia, and you have Albert Speer, who was Hitler's architect, and you have the Dalai Lama, all kind of answering that question. And for my students, that book took on a very personal meaning about their journeys with forgiveness. And we do a project with it, and they share, and they really connect as a group, and they begin to really care about each other and invest in each other. And that classroom, in many years, not all years, but in many years, that classroom becomes a sacred space for those students to not only learn history together, but to learn about each other together, and to learn how to have conversations with people who have different beliefs than you. To ask people who have different beliefs than you, instead of judging them, but asking, what led you to that belief? What led you to that opinion? And then students share their story, and it's like, oh, I understand you so much better now. And that's what I love about this class. I love the history, but I also love the lessons that it teaches students about themselves and humanity.
As you teach this class, and it sounds like it's a Global Studies 9 and 10 honors course, have you, 24 years, my gosh, Leigh-Anne, you must have started when you were 5.
So old.
Have anybody gone on to be teachers? Have they ever responded that this Protect was a transformative class in their lives? Did you get any feedback like that?
Sure. So some people have gone on to be educators. I have one of my former students who's a history teacher, so I was like, yes. But also, I have a couple who are in law school right now, one who says she's going to be studying specifically immigration law, which I think is awesome. But even students who are going into very different fields. I have one student who just loved human rights and history, but knew she was a science med person. And even though she's a science med person, she still takes classes that support her desire to learn more about human rights. She was actually an intern here one summer.
So you've had other summer programs that have been out of the Jackson Center, haven't you?
We've had, in the past, we had 3 or 4 here, summer programs. Our last one was housed out of Chautauqua Lake School, but we took that summer program on the road.
Did you?
We went to Erie, to the refugee center in Erie. We went to Buff State to work with the Anne Frank Project. We went to a naturalization ceremony in Buffalo, and that, one of my students said, of all the things our country sometimes gets wrong, today they did 55 things right, because there were 55 people who became citizens that day, and it was so beautiful to see.
Your students are studying the Holocaust, which it really wasn't even a term right after the war. I mean, this was really something that emerged from the Nuremberg trial and Raphael Lemkin. And in your studies, do you get into the aspect of how the act occurred and gathering of the evidence, sort of the legal aspect of this, or is that not so?
No, we do. The Nazis left so much documentation that it's hard not to get into that, to studying the documentation, of course. We get into Raphael Lemkin, how the term genocide came to be, his journey to make that happen. We do talk about the Nuremberg trials, and then kind of the fallout after the Nuremberg trials, as we get into the Cold War and we see a lot of the Nazis released, and we talk about, what does that look like? Why did that happen? So yes, we do go into that history as well. Political
justice, when you talk about what you've just said about the Nazis who were convicted at the subsequent Nuremberg trials, subsequently commuted for reasons, is that a hard thing to explain? It's often a hard thing for even scholars today when they talk about leaders who allegedly commit war crimes. We're seeing some right now, that for political reasons they seek immunity, that whole social justice aspect of it, or there are political reasons to do that, political expediencies. Is that a hard thing to explain?
Yes. Yes, it's a very hard thing to explain, why the world, and after World War II, we see a shift because there's a Cold War. And, on one hand, you have Jackson at Nuremberg carrying on these unbelievable, unprecedented trials with all of the challenge that face them, and they succeed. And then you have the U.S. launching Operation Paperclip, which brings in former Nazis into the country to help work on our weapons program to fight the Cold War. And it is hard to understand that and teach that and balance it, but you have to teach that whole history for sure.
How do the students react to that? Because that's situation ethics at its highest point.
Yeah. They have varying opinions. I don't know if I can point to a specific reaction. A lot of times when we study about the United States and the Holocaust, students are frustrated about what we knew when we knew it, why we did what we did, why we didn't do more. But then we have to go back and say, but wait, let's look at what was going on in our country at that time so we can better understand, to look at more pieces of that puzzle. We have to talk about the Great Depression if we're going to talk about what was going on at that point in history.
having done this now, do you feel like it's the study of the Holocaust, of which there are very few survivors alive, that first-person accounts, they're just sort of passing on due to time. Is it harder to recruit students to understand a subject which is somewhat kind of difficult to grasp? And especially if you're not talking to somebody who actually lived it.
Right. I don't think so. Like, the class tends to be not huge, but I like it that way because I want the students to connect and get to know each other. But the students who've taken the class share their experiences with other students. And that is kind of how that program has survived, of students saying, you won't believe the things that you will learn. Because, students are like, Holocaust, why would I want to study that? That's so depressing. But then other students are like, no, 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 no. You're going to learn so much in that class that you will take with you on the next chapter of your life.
You are the program director of the Theodore and Pauline Cohen Holocaust Education Program in conjunction with the Hebrew Congregation of Chautauqua. There's some folks in the audience who have listened to you in the past. How did that happen? How did a teacher from Chautauqua Lake School grab the attention of the Hebrew congregation?
Oh, it's a great story, Greg. I was invited to speak at Chautauqua for the Hebrew congregation, maybe like 2014. And as I was speaking, talking about the importance of Holocaust education and the success with our class at Chautauqua Lake School, somebody in the audience reached out to me afterwards and said, I'd like to help your class get to Washington. I would like to work with you. And I was like, that's great. And didn't really think much would come of it. And then the next fall, he's like, I raised the money for your class to go to DC. And I was like, whew, wow. Like, it is so rare that somebody just comes up alongside an educator in public education and says, we want to do this for you. And so that was the start of a relationship. So the first trip I took to DC was just one class of students. The next year the program kept growing and growing. So after we did our first trip with just students, I brought the students to another summer speaker series, and they spoke about their experience in DC. And the Hebrew congregation was like, oh, we want to get behind this and support this. And so that is what started the relationship. So we started with just students, and then we're like, I wonder if students and teachers can learn together. So we took students and teachers together, and it worked very well. And then we're like, I wonder if we could do multiple schools on the same trip. And we reached out to other schools. And so we bring multiple schools, multiple students, multiple teachers together for this amazing learning experience.
So now it's part of you're a program director, and by the way, your resume is a mile long here, Leigh-Anne. So not only did the Hebrew congregation recognize you, but you've gotten other recognitions of something that you really started from whole cloth, inspired by the group from Houston, the toolkit folks, the treasure chest. I remember they actually had a chest.
I believe they did.
They did. It was a chest. You came in with a chest. And I mean, as I recall. And so here you're moving your way along, and the Toby Tickton Back Award, that's a very distinguished award from really up in Buffalo. And what has that done for your teaching? Is that kind of, you felt like the recognition that maybe you're on to something which has a broader cause?
For sure, the outside recognition feels really good, but it's really how the students respond to the class, and it's when students come back to me years later and say, that mattered, or this is what I'm doing now because of what you taught me. That to me is more important than anything else.
Talk to me about your curriculum.
Okay.
You've obviously created something over 24 years. You've created it, you refined it, and it's probably marketable at this point. What does it consist of?
So, we use, our textbook is The History as It's Told at the Holocaust Museum in Washington by Michael Berenbaum. And so when the students get to Washington, what they're seeing at the museum reflects what they've learned in the classroom. We use salvage pages by Alexander Zapruder, which is, just a different take on, a lot of people know Anne Frank, but she's not the only teenage diarist, and Salvaged Pages puts together 14 different teenage diaries, and so we pull from that. Interestingly, Alex Zapruder, who put these diaries together, launched a program at the start of COVID called Dispatches from Quarantine. And she put prompts out, periodically for students to respond and to write their story about their history. And it was just beautiful. So some of my students did that too, and are on that program website. So we used Salvaged Pages. We used Problem from Hell by Samantha Power, looking at other genocides. We used Carl Wilkins' book. We used, there's so many resources. Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning when we're talking about perpetrators. And Sunflower.
This is a walk down memory lane for me, and if you cause me to pause for a second, the names you've been dropping, I'm writing them down quickly. Michael Berenbaum, have you ever met him? Phenomenal. He was here in 2001 at the Jackson Center. He was the very first person we had, and it was a private interview about our vision, and he basically he listened to us, and then he told us what we should be doing, and we did it. And I've subsequently met him on a couple of other occasions. Samantha Power, we met her in, have you met her as well?
Yes, she spoke at Chautauqua, I believe. Yeah.
She did, and likewise when we met her in at Auschwitz, and Christopher Browning was a professor of mine at Allegheny.
Really?
Yeah. So this is a small world department.
Absolutely.
And Wiesenthal, you met at Chautauqua probably,
Yes.
at least saw him there.
Yeah.
Carl Wilkins, you mentioned his name, and I know he's somebody you're fond of. Talk to us about him.
So Carl Wilkins was the only American to stay in Rwanda in 1994 when genocide broke out there. He had been living there as a missionary, and all Americans were ordered to leave the country, and he struggled with that. He's like, if ever there was a time that the Rwandans needed us, it was now, and I can't go. And he basically had to sign a paper saying that he understood he was violating what the United States want him to do, and he was staying at his own risk. And his stories from that time in Rwanda are absolutely remarkable, of working with an orphanage to supply water to keep the militia away, to help people medically in need, with no medical training, to try and help people in need. And then to help work with Rwanda after, and to watch how Rwanda heals and moves forward and rebuilds their country has been remarkable. And I had the honor of traveling to Rwanda, and it was a place that broke my heart and restored my soul at the same time. And those sound like two very contradictory things, but it did. You see the places of genocide and the churches, and you meet the people who participated, and you see what's happening, and it was an incredible experience. And, and it just exemplified that you need to look for the good in all situations, which is what Carl Wilkins talks about, is looking for the good. And that you are not your worst mistake, that you can move past tragic things. And what a great lesson that is for students, that you are not the worst thing you have ever done, that there's a lot of life ahead of you.
Now, Carl is from the United States.
Yes.
But does he continue to go back to Rwanda?
He does continue to go back to Rwanda periodically, and he does take teacher groups. He's located in Washington State now. He still speaks to schools, in schools. We're hoping to bring him here in May. Like May 24th, 25th, he will be in the area. So we're excited to welcome him here to speak to students from throughout Chautauqua County. It will be another multi-school event. And he'll be talking about respect, empathy, and inclusion, which are very important for our students.
And, at the Jackson Center, we annually have the International Humanitarian Law Dialogues, of which brings in the chief prosecutors of those tribunals, which includes the Rwanda Tribunal. And I don't know if your paths have ever crossed with Hassan Jallos, chief prosecutor, but he'll be back here in August. And that's always been a remarkable opportunity to look inside the actual prosecution of those most responsible for those crimes.
Yes.
As you talk about you broke your heart or restored your soul, expand on that a little bit more. I mean, you're over there for the first time and the only time, and Carl's walking you
I'm
around.
going back.
Huh?
I'm going back.
But you know, first of all, how did Carl do the tour? Maybe that's the best way to get into this. So you fly in to Rwanda, and you get out of the plane, and next thing you know, he has an agenda, he has an itinerary.
Sure.
So what is that?
You know, parts of the agenda were kind of done on the fly and day to day, but there were definite places that we stopped. We went to a prison that was originally operated by the Belgians in Rwanda, and we also went to a Tige camp, which is a work camp, where people who committed genocide are serving their time. And when we walked into the Tige camp, I wish I had the video to show you. Everyone is singing and dancing, and the guards have no weapons. There are no walls around a Tige camp. Mm-hmm. You get leave from the Tige camp. And it was remarkable conversations there. We also had the opportunity to meet with the U.S. ambassador. We also had the opportunity to meet with someone from Paul Kagame's staff. It was an exceptionally educational trip, and just changed my perspective on so many things.
So you met Paul, is it Kagame?
Somebody from his staff.
Okay.
We were kind of hoping Paul Kagame was going to walk in, but.
Yeah. Well, the story, of course, it became really much more well-known through the movie Hotel Rwanda. You know, if that's part of your education, do you show that as?
I don't show Hotel Rwanda. There's another movie I use when I teach Rwanda called Sometimes in April, which I think gives a little bit more of an accurate perspective.
Because I mean, the whole story is with the United Nations, and that whole thing is quite remarkable. So you come back after that transformative experience. How was your next semester? Were you energized?
Absolutely energized, fired up, and ready to do new things in my classroom.
How do you learn what to do that's, you know, you're kind of taking this diamond and buffing it and making it even better? What's your process?
It's trial and error. It really is. Some days I have lessons that I'm like, that was awesome. And then other days I'm like, we are never doing that again. That did not work. You know, it really is. It's a lot of trial and error. And you know, after years, you're like, I think that'll work. I think that won't work. But it really is.
How do you know? Do you look in the students' eyes and they either glazing over or there's a juice factor?
You can kind of tell, sure, that, you know, students are with you in the lesson or they're not.
As part of the education process, there's certainly anti-Semitism going on. There's the Holocaust deniers. Do you teach that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The year after Charlottesville was so difficult to teach. I came back. My daughter went to school just outside Charlottesville, and I dropped her off at college, and it was the weekend. I dropped her off the weekend right after that had happened, and that's how we started our class. Like, how do you not start your class with the current events and anti-Semitism? And you know, for so long when I was teaching this class, I'm like, I think we're doing better. I don't think we're going to have to teach anti-Semitism as much. I don't think we're going to have to teach Holocaust denial as much, but man, we need to be prudent with that. We need to keep teaching that for sure.
You know, right behind me here at the Carl Kappa Robert Jackson Studios, a guy named Bill Flanders. Do you know Bill?
I do not know Bill.
Okay, he's 99 years old, and he is quoted as saying, I was born in 1922. Do the math. And by the time I was in school, World War I was considered ancient history. And World War I, of course, ended in 1918. And then his sidekick there went on to say in an email to me, "It's no wonder that we keep making the same failures to fund, to educate, and therefore suffer the consequences." Do you have a sense of that? That here you have such a unique program that all of a sudden, frankly, the news tells us it's pretty relevant today to what's going on in Ukraine, but that maybe their funding sources and the other support you may be getting is not always there? Teaching history.
I don't know, I always felt supported. I always felt supported in my classroom and in what I was doing and in what I was teaching. And I know that's not true for everyone. I know everyone does not feel that way. But I always have. I've always been blessed that way.
So how about other teachers? Is there a consortium within Chautauqua County who are kind of Leigh-Anne Hendrick's wannabes?
No, definitely not. But no, we're working on growing our program, and there's definitely teachers who love the programming that we've done through the Hebrew congregation, and so they kind of seek us out. We have a mailing list that we use, and we're working on our website right now. And so we're growing. We're working on a speaker program with Carl Wilkins. We had one in February that we had to cancel due to the uptick in COVID. We are working on some student programs. We're going to do a Student Human Rights Symposium Day in May, and that is going to focus on Ukraine. We're also working on starting a lending library of class sets of books that teachers can, ask to use for their classroom. Salvaged Pages is the first requested set. Carl Wilkins' books is the second one, and then the third one is going to be Isabel Wilkerson's Cast. It's going to be the third set, and that's where we're starting our lending library, so that's new. So we're very excited about that endeavor to put those books in teachers' hands.
Have you created a blog or some presence on social media where you take your work in the classroom and do something YouTube-ish? I don't think it's a word, but you get in front of a camera and talk a little bit?
No. I do not. I don't feel like this is very much out of my comfort zone right now to be here and to be in front of the camera. And when we were on online schooling, that was also very much out of my comfort zone. But no, I haven't done a YouTube or a TikTok or anything like that.
You're very good. I mean, how you articulate your program, you've done this nationally. It's just you'd be a natural, yeah. And,
thank you.
You see how Drew does it. He's gone from being a shy guy to all of a sudden a TV personality. Is there something, because a lot of people are going to be watching this, they're going to see it on YouTube and perhaps other social media, and as you now have the bully pulpit, this is your opportunity to say, all right, we've got this program, it's been going on for 24 years, we've impacted a bunch of students, but there's obviously a greater audience here. What would you suggest they could help?
I would just say to keep supporting teachers and educators who are doing the good, hard work in the classrooms. It hasn't been easy. But yeah, to just come alongside your teachers. I mean, I just think about how much we have accomplished with what we have done with our summer institutes and the programming that we have done through the Hebrew Congregation of Chautauqua. And you look, okay, they funded me, and they funded the teachers, and they funded the school, and they funded these students, and we all went to DC. But then you break that down and you come back from DC and you go back to your school and you go back to your classroom, and then you're this individual student. And I had this conversation with an individual student the other day, and how is DC for you? And the student said to me, I never found my niche of people in high school. And by meeting students from other schools, I found people who were like me and accept me for who I am. And I got to spend some quality time face-to-face with other students in our school, and I have friends. And was that the objective of the trip? No, but is that an amazing story? Yes, and it's just those little ripple effects that just change and impact students, and you never know the impact that you're going to have until you do it. And so we're doing it.
Talk about the impact. When the Hebrew congregation has supported this, do you give them an annual report of your activities, and what might that look like?
Oh, sure. I give multiple reports. The Hebrew congregation of Chautauqua has an education committee. We meet periodically. We meet in person over the summer. We've done a few Zoom meetings. I send, written reports. I send pictures of what we've been doing. And they are just the greatest people and champions, and they just embrace this program and have given it wings to fly.
Well, describe the program. Obviously, we know the manifestation of it is you going to Washington with a number, now a number of students, close to 50, I think you had, didn't you?
We did, because that's all the tickets we can get. Next year, we're hoping to do more, but COVID still had really tight restrictions on museums this year.
So
They're not open at capacity yet, so it was very difficult to acquire tickets. So
probably much nicer to go through the museum on that
it
basis.
was. It sure was.
Yeah. So what else does the program consist of? So is to do a verbal report that you might give to the congregation, to these people behind me.
Sure. So we have really 4 parts to our program, and I kind of went through them a little bit already. One being the trip to DC. Another facet of the program is our teacher education, where we run teacher workshops. We did our teacher workshop in December this year. Teachers who participate in that workshop are invited on our DC trip with the hope that they will teach a greater unit on the Holocaust or human rights or social justice. And then when they have that greater unit, we will invite them to join us, their class to join us on the trip as well. We have our speaker program. We like to do speakers a few times a year. Again, a couple of those got canceled this year due to COVID. However, we will have Carl Wilkins speaking in May. And we also have a student summer symposium. This year we're shifting that to the spring because myself and my co-director, Emily Dorman, have really tight schedules this summer, and that's when it works best for us this year. So we, and then our lending library. So we have wonderful programs for the teachers and students in our county.
If you had unlimited resources, what else would you do?
Travel. Travel. I would take the kids and travel more. I've traveled with students internationally before, and it's just so remarkable to see students in a different environment, a culture that is not their own, and learn to adapt and grow and develop. And it gives them the confidence to know that the world is open to them. Some of the students I take to Washington or on these trips, they might never leave Chautauqua County. They might only stay here or just travel, within a couple hours. But going on a trip like that gives them the opportunity to see, like, wow, this world is just as much mine as it is anybody else's. It's awesome. To take students in the Capitol building, to see them in the rotunda the first time they look up.
Yeah.
It's amazing. It's just such a gift to watch them grow and to just kind of see them process the whole thing.
Are the students 9th and 10th grade, is that your group?
The students at Chautauqua Lake who take the Holocaust class are 11th and 12th graders.
Okay.
They have to have completed Global Studies 10, so they have a basic understanding of the Holocaust before they take the class.
Okay.
Some of the other groups that come with us, we have a class called Perspectives from Chautauqua Lake School that joined us on our trip. That is a human rights, social justice, focusing mostly on race, and that is 9 through 12 students. Our group from Brockton included their AP Global class, so mostly older students, and then we had a Holocaust class from Silver Creek that joined us as well.
So this class that you have been teaching, an honors level, full credit Holocaust and Genocide, is that the subject for the whole term?
It is.
So, wow.
And we don't finish it.
Yeah.
And that seems so crazy. Like, how can you not finish it? You are teaching a year-long class. How did you not get into everything? Because we go so deep into various topics. and we dig deep, and we learn the history deeply on various topics. And so, yeah, it's a whole credit class, and sometimes we don't even make it through the whole curriculum.
Out of curiosity, I was just in Minneapolis where doing that exhibit, I gave you the book, and met a Warsaw Ghetto survivor and interviewed him. And I just wondered if you get to the specificity of such incidents like the Warsaw Ghetto, how that happened, how they ultimately surrounded it. Do you dig deep into that?
Oh, yeah, we do. We actually, it's a docudrama that we watch on Warsaw called Uprising. HBO did it years ago. It's fantastic telling the story of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, but as we're watching it, we dig deep into each of the ghetto fighters and their story and what they did, after the war, who made it out, who didn't. We talk about the city, we talk about the survivors, we get to go deep. And then so when my students, interestingly, I was just reading something that a student years ago wrote. We took them to the Holocaust Museum, and we're standing in front of this area, and it was bricks from the Warsaw Ghetto. And she's like, I just started tearing up because I remember those fighters, and I look at them on the wall at the museum, and I feel like I know them, and I know their story, and here it is right in front of me.
Recently, in fact, this past week, one of our dear friends, Dr. Helen Fagan, who'd been here to discuss the Warsaw Ghetto with Jerry Spinelli, had a book.
Yes.
Milkweed. And she just passed away at 100, like I say, 104. But she did an interview like where you are right now, and it's riveting because she, at a certain age, 16, felt in the Warsaw Ghetto to be a teacher of young women, to give them hope, to keep them alive, essentially, while all else was happening around them and to them. It was just remarkable. So only as a teacher's aide, that's one of the interviews that I look back on that with a great deal of poignancy. I'll send it to you.
That'd be great. I'd love to see that.
Type of thing. 10 years from now, what's LeighAnne Hendrick's, what's your curriculum going to look like? What's that?
I don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years.
5 years, all right. You're fine.
I don't know. Like, it changes. Like, you have your content, right? Your solid history, your solid content. But what are students going to want to know? What are they going to lean into? And a lot of this, sometimes students will lean into a topic, and I'm like, okay, this is the way we're going. And so you adjust the curriculum to follow sometimes what the students want to know more about. I don't know. We're working a lot right now with Ukraine and what that's going to look like, and the human rights, and talking about United Nations and NATO, and what have we learned and where are we going. And it's amazing how relevant this history still is.
Just again, personal, but just so fresh. I just came back from Minneapolis with an idea that to 300-400 people, I was going to speak about the legacy of the Nuremberg trial. And because that which was happening in the news that day about Ukrainian, Putin, war crimes, Nuremberg too, you had to know a little bit about the Nuremberg trial. That's the fundamental, and then immediately the interest and the questions were all on that.
Sure.
And I suspect you're doing the same in your class, because that is real time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we teach the Cold War in high school, we teach about the structure of the UN and how it was created after World War II, and why there's the Security Council, and why there's 5 countries that have veto power. And even before all this happened, we talk about, what problems do you see with this? Well, in the Cold War, you have the United States and Russia on the Security Council. Well, Soviet Union then. What would get accomplished? Very little. And so, fast forward to today, and we still have that same issue with the Security Council. I don't want to get too deep into Ukraine.
Why?
I mean, we can, but it's.
I'm curious, because this is how you got to be nimble here.
Well, here's the deal. We all look back at World War II, and we look back at the Holocaust, and we say, never again, never again. And then we've set up mechanisms that prevent us from helping. And so, when we were on the Zoom call last week about Ukraine, and one of the speakers said, you know, the United Nations is standing shoulder to shoulder and NATO is standing shoulder to shoulder. But to what end? There's not a lot that they can do. And so we're watching Ukraine just go down, and it's devastating because we've watched other countries go down before. And I don't know, I love watching them fight, and I hope, I don't know. It's so hard. It's so hard to watch it every day and to see what is happening. To know people who are stuck in a city but won't leave their apartments because that's the only home they have, and they don't want to give it up. Because if they leave and they go to Poland, then they don't have a home anymore. And so they stay in Kharkiv. And it's just, and you're watching it being bombed. And you want the world to respond, but you see the mechanism in place that prevents them from responding. And it's heartbreaking.
What would your message be to the president?
To our president?
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, I just want to do everything that we can to help the people to, you know, we have a world leader who is violating the rules of war, who is violating the UN Charter, who's violating the International Declaration of Human Rights. And we're watching. And I just want to do something.
Yeah. In that webinar, with which is put together, Jackson Center was a co-sponsor.
Yes.
David Crane
Yeah.
was on that, and a Ukrainian. It was very interesting. And what was your walk away from that? Because the issue of not only the mechanism, but the reaction, what would happen even if we were able to get control of a guy named Putin or his generals?
Right.
How would we prosecute him given what we did in the 40s at Nuremberg? You know, would that even be relevant today?
I mean, I think the mechanisms are in place for the International Criminal Court to proceed and prosecute. And I believe that that mechanism will work. That's my hope.
Yep. Stay tuned. There'll be more of this in August here at Chautauqua Institution,
Yes.
because the International Humanitarian Law Roundtable will be back. That's a scoop for you guys watching this. I know that the subject that they were going to talk about has gone right out the window, and Ukraine will be forefront.
Sure.
So you came in or not, well, maybe you didn't. When I asked you to come in, you readily accepted. Do you ever have any regrets that you accepted yes?
Only when I get nervous, because I'm not good at speaking in front of people or not knowing what you're going to ask me. Or, you know, when I go and I present to teachers, I know my content and I know what I'm going to say and I know how I'm going to present it. So this was very much out of my comfort zone. But I welcome the opportunity, so thank you for having me.
So what's the question I forgot to ask you? I know you were driving down and thinking, I wonder if he's going to ask about this, I wonder if he's going to ask about that. Was there something that I should have covered on the Leigh-Anne Hendrick story?
I don't think so. I think you've got it pretty much covered.
By the way, where'd you go to college?
I went to Nazareth College in Rochester, and then I went to SUNY Potsdam.
Did you study such things that might help you in where you ended up today?
My undergrad was poli-sci. I loved politics. And I still enjoy politics. Like when there's an election, man, I love watching those returns come in, and I do still enjoy politics. But my undergrad was poli-sci pre-law, and then my graduate was education.
Well, you have a real sense of all of that. When you come home at night after having a wonderful teaching day, certainly on this subject, do the kids wonder, hey, Mom, is there something other than the Holocaust and genocide?
Of course, we talk about lots of different things. It's not just that. That's just a piece of the pie.
Well, this is remarkable. Leigh-Anne, I've learned so much. I'm glad that part of the genesis of what got you into where you've gone and gotten a number of awards was here
Yes.
at Jackson Center. And I remember that program. And I just am delighted, and I'm sure the people who will watch this will get a better sense of you as a quality person, quality teacher on a very quality and timely topic. So
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
you.
Bye-bye.